Vergeef mek, mijn giltas. That's Old English. And let me try contemporary English. Vergeef mek, Old English. That's forgive me. Mijn giltas. My guilt. I'm, as my fault, as we say in contemporary English, contemporary colloquialism. My name's Olurotimi Osha, and I was having a discussion on the development of the English language, which is the language in which our framers wrote the Declaration of the Independence, and of course the seminal, our U.S. Constitution, the cornerstone of our democracy, our republic. Um, so I was discussing. I had stopped at the middle. I'd just passed the development of the Middle English and its evolution into uh, early modern English, which started from about 1500 to about 1700. That was the language that Shakespeare wrote in, which is what we're more familiar with, and that's what our framers were writing in. So we're more familiar with the early modern English. Um, Now, so lat os gone, lat os gone. Of course, that's Middle English, and contemporary English, that's let us go on, right? So I'm trying. I of course I probably won't get the accent properly, but you get the idea how English was evolving from the Old English language, which was spoken from by the Anglo Saxons from between 500 AD to 1100 AD, and then Middle English. That was what I just said. Lat os gone, from which was spoken from about 1100 to 1500, and of course what we now speak today, sort of what I'm speaking now, the language of Shakespeare from 1500 to 1700, and that era witnessed the great vowel shift, and I discussed the great vowel shift. I'm going to do a subsequent video to just summarize the main things instead of having the evolution of the language broken up into distinct videos. So I'm going to eventually do one video to just summarize everything. But our language is very important because we were breaking away from the English, and but we retained their language. And as I said, our incumbent president, number 45 and 47, President Donald Trump, uh, even though it's not in our constitution, English is not in our constitution as an official language. It's been the de facto language. But number 45 and number 47, he issued an executive order 14224, which made English, designated English as an official language of the United States. But of course, that's not binding because it's not constitutional. No, it's not in our constitution. We'd have to go through an amendment to make it to put it in our constitution. But besides the the establishment of an official language is within under the purview of, it's covered by uh, the 10th Amendment, right? The 10th Amendment, I said what that was earlier. The 10th Amendment is, I like the language of our Constitution and our Declaration. So I like to say it in the way the framers wrote it. And this was from James Madison. The 10th Amendment says that powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So the establishment of an official language, since it's not uh, specified, delegated, it's not elaborated, it's not stated in the Constitution as a federal power, and it's not prohibited to the states. So that's something that's within the purview of the states to establish or to make into law, to codify, and which about 32 states have already codified in the United States. They've made English as official language or as a second official language. So And as I was saying that, we've retained the English language. It's still what we speak today. And I had reached the era of the early modern English, which is what Shakespeare was speaking from about 1500, and that's the language our framers spoke. Interestingly, um, as I said, that we still speak English. What differentiates what's spoken in America and what's spoken in England is the accent. We have what's apparently an American English accent, and the British, they have their British English language accent. But interestingly, scholars have determined that the the American English accent, is actually closer to what Shakespeare would have spoken, right? The language of Shakespeare, the accent is closer to the language of Shakespeare than the contemporary British English accent is to the language of Shakespeare. Because apparently, the English of the Americans, it froze, it sort of froze in time. It got the way it was spoken. It sort of froze in time. And while the British, English, they've continued to evolve. I suppose with empire or whatever, they've continued to evolve. And by the way, um, of course, we have a variety of accents in America. There's a Southern drawl, and there's what they speak in Massachusetts. I lived in Massachusetts, and I noticed people in Massachusetts speak something very close to a British accent, right? So that's a language that the founding fathers, our framers, would have spoken in, and the language that they were speaking in England. So, of course, there was no distinction between the language that George Washington spoke in and the language that they were speaking in Parliament in England at the time. Uh, and so English, of course, it's evolved over the time. What's fascinating about it is how it continues to adapt and embrace new words and new forms, and it continues to adapt. Again, it's the most widely spoken language in the world. So now we moved from the Middle English language. Middle English, of course, the author, the notable author of that time uh, was was Chaucer, right? Geoffrey Chaucer with the Canterbury Tales. Now, by the time we get into the early modern English, but from 1500, significantly the Renaissance period and the development of the printing press, it helped standardize the English language the way it was written. So there's a guy called William Caxton. William Caxton is his name. They say he was born in Kent or so. William Caxton, he was instrumental in the standardization of the English language. It's called the London Standard, right? London Chancery Standard, right? London Chancery English Standard. So the standardization of English language in the way it was written. Uh, there's the evolution. You may speak in one way, but the way people write is different. So the writing of English became standardized in terms of spelling, especially in terms of spelling. And because of the development of the printing press, there were actually many printers who came from the Dutch area, because the Dutch were great printers in that time. At that time, in fact, William Caxton had moved to Bruges, right? Bruges is that's in Belgium. They were all one at that time, I suppose. He'd moved to Bruges and he developed. He'd become a printer. He saw the development of printing, and on the continent, and so he came back to England and he became a printer, and he was responsible for a number of uh, classical works being printed. So one of the things that happened during the Renaissance period, of course, that the 15th century, the 16th century, that was the Renaissance. Renaissance was going on in Italy. There was also a Dutch Renaissance, right? Jan van Eyck is a notable figure of the Dutch Renaissance. So the philosophers. So that was the Renaissance was the efflorescence in the arts, in language, and so in the English language also went through its own renaissance because it reached its heights with the works of William Shakespeare, right? William Shakespeare, he, as they say, nobody created or contributed more words in the English language than William Shakespeare. And so during the Renaissance and with the printing, uh, there was the interest in classical works. Again, the classics were the Roman works, the Roman literature and Greek literature. That's Latin literature and Greek literature. And so William Caxton, as a printer, he printed a lot of classics, and so this now became available at a cheap price widely because initially in the early medieval period. Um, it was monks, it was a clergy who actually they hand wrote texts. Texts were written by the monks, right? By the clergy. And so but with the development of printing, text, the written word spread widely, about 200 million uh, volumes, right? 200 volumes of 200 pages, got written, got distributed, right? Uh, Pieces of literature got distributed. 200 million pages, yeah, also got distributed during this era, during uh, the efflorescence of the printing press and the Renaissance and the interest in the classics, and of course. This introduced new words, Latin words, Greek words into the English language with the Enlightenment era as well. So words like philosophy, encyclopedia, these words entered the English language. Photography, that's Greek. They entered the English language, and one of the books that William Caxton was responsible for printing and translating was Geoffrey Chaucer's the Canterbury Tales. Right, the Canterbury Tales, of course, that's from Middle English, right? That's a notable work from Middle English. So William Caxton started to translate a lot of works, classics, and things like that, and a lot of writings. He was an editor, he was a writer, and did a lot of translation and printed great works, classical works. So, but he wasn't a he wasn't an outstanding printer because he printed while he was interested in volume, right? Uh, printing as many copies, documents as possible. He wasn't conscientious as a printer. So many works that he translated, for instance, if he was translating something in French, remember French was the language of the courts of law, of science, of the Enlightenment. If he was translating works, he would he would print the words directly from their French instead of translating them to English words. So he was responsible for the way words some many words just coming into the written English lexicon, right? Um, Something else that happened with the printing in terms of the standardization of the written English language, because uh, people from the you know Dutch speakers and Germanic speakers who came from the mainland, from the continent, because of course printing was developed by Germans, by the Johannes Gutenberg he was the one who invented printing, the German, and so the Dutch were the big mercantile, big business people back then, right? And so uh, their printers came down. They also had the Renaissance, the Dutch Renaissance. So they came down. A lot of the printers came into England. They were responsible for the standardization of the way the English language was written. So you will notice that there's some words, right? They're spelled in strange ways. For instance, ghost, right? Ghost is it's pronounced a G-O-S-T, ghost. You don't expect an H because an H is it's redundant, right? It's not doing anything like the word ghost. So it was these Dutch printers, these printers from the mainland who made the decision on how words should be written. And so they included an H, for instance, in the spelling of ghost. So ghost is Ghost, even though it's not pronounced that way. It has no relevance. So they determined how these words were written down in standard English. So and a word, for instance, like should, they decided to put an L, Should, right? Should. There's no L in the pronunciation of should. So this is what the printers were responsible for as they standardized written English. Now, no book contributed more to the development of the English language and contributed more words, right, to the English language as the Bible. So King James commissioned the printing of the English version of the Bible, the King James version of the Bible, in 1611, and to make the Bible more accessible to the public, to the lay people. So during prior to the English Reformation, the lay people were not allowed to read the Bible, right? They could they could actually be executed. So only priests could read the Bible, and they would just they'd read it out to the lay persons, but only priests, the clergy, and only the Pope could interpret the Bible. Of course, so only the clergy. The clergy had a monopoly, right, on the reading of Scripture back then. But after the Reformation and the schism in the church that created the Protestants and the and left behind the Catholic Church, which still did everything in Latin. There was now the King James in England, King James the First. He commissioned the printing and publication of the King James English Bible, which everybody still uses today. I love that language, and so it contributed tremendously to the way English was written and spoken because it now standardized the language. And of course, the Puritans, when they came to America, they brought the King James Bible with them. And the Puritans, one of the characteristics of the Puritans was being erudite, right? They wanted to be pious, and they also thought piety went hand in hand with being very scholarly. So the Puritans knew the Bible from cover to cover. John Adams was a descendant of Puritans, right? So the Puritans, of course, went to Plymouth, Rock. The Puritans and the Pilgrims are sort of a little bit different, but they were similar. But the Puritans, I talked in an earlier video about how the Puritans became very powerful in Parliament. Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan. He became Lord Protector of England. He didn't take the title of king after they beheaded the King Charles I over religion, right? He was showing a lot, affection, sympathies towards the Roman Catholic Church, and the Puritans were a more fervent faction of the Protestants, right? They wanted to do away with they didn't like the Anglican or the Church of England. Its forms, it still had relics of the Roman Catholic Church. So the Puritans were very dour. They were very, they were more dolorous, more doleful, and of course they emphasized reading of the Bible and, just being scholarly. That was a characteristic of the Puritan. So you can see it's a reason a lot of our founding fathers were very scholarly. So the early Americans who came, our founding fathers, John Adams, you see they've emphasized, they were very bookish people, right? You can see how they were very bookish, and you can see what they did in our Constitution and our Declaration, and just the foundation of the country. Now I'll talk about other aspects that they had. Of course, they were very mercantile. They were very very into consumerism, into materialism, right? While they objected uh, and they rejected the aristocratic systems of England and Europe, and they actually prohibited hereditary titles and noble titles in our constitution. But they promoted commerce, trade, you know, which was very common to the members of the middle class, the bourgeois, the burghers, and the Puritans were very wealthy. They, even though they were very, they were very staid, right? They were very staid in manner, but they were very industrious, right? They were very industrious, in addition to being very erudite and scholarly. So, so the printing press standardized written English, and it's it brought it caused in the English language to evolve to much of what we know today and how we speak it. And of course, another development that affected the English language was the industrial revolution, which occurred in England in 1750, just about less than 3 decades prior to the our declaration and the revolution, right? When we broke off from the mother nation England. So the Industrial Revolution, that was when there were innovations that developed, factory systems, the standardization of commodities, and commodities were now widely created, and with the use of iron, steam engine, all of these things promoted the industrial revolution, and it caused a boom in cities like London, and of course that's what philosophers like Karl Marx, came to repudiate later on. So it led to the mass production of consumer goods never known to mankind in quantities never known to before to mankind. Now it also led to the creation of words that came into they were introduced into the English lexicon. For instance, words like train, right, the piston, right, uh, these came into the English language because of the industrial revolution. Something else that affected the development of the English language was colonialization, right? The colonialism, right? Like, and colonization is also a word. So of course the reason the framers, founding fathers, and Americans, Englishmen came to the New World was to establish colonies, right? And so the 13 colonies, the it led to the interaction of Englishmen, Europeans with Native Americans, for instance, and of course these introduced new words into the lexicon. And apart from that, the English people were becoming explorers. They're going to other parts as well. They went to India, they went to Africa, they went to the Caribbean, and so they introduced new words. They were explorers, they were traders. Words that entered the English language from India, for instance, hammock, uh, from Asia, tea. Tea is actually, everybody knows of the English tea, but tea actually came into the English language from China, and in Africa as well. In fact, there's several words that came from Africa: trek, chimpanzee, zebra. These came from Africa. So there are many words. Many words came in. Colonialism affected the English language because new words came into the English language as a result of colonialism, and of course as a result of industrialization. So this, I'm going to cut it off. This was the portion where the Revolutionary War came about, the era of colonialism. That was where the watershed moment, where there was the Declaration of Independence, and English had been standardized, and it evolved to the point where our framers wrote down the Declaration of Independence in the language, the early modern English that was used then, and which is still very is still appealing and is still used, in writing. We appreciate it today. Of course, contemporary English has evolved in many different ways, especially, and America has influenced the development of contemporary English because of pop culture, right? Popular culture. American artists are very popular all over the world. Our musicians, our actors, and so the slang, the colloquialism that they use, even rap, the internet age as well. So this is going beyond our founding fathers, but I'm just you know going into the evolution and the legacy of the English language. I remember when I was in England, an Englishman was concerned that the British English kids, English youth, wanted to talk like Americans because of pop culture, because of rap, because of the Hollywood. They wanted to talk like Americans. They were trying to talk like Americans, and so the English language. It's been a huge heritage, of course, from Britain, and now we're giving back to Britain as well. I'm a product of colonialism. Of course, English is the official language of Nigeria, where I'm originally from. I'm an American citizen, and of course, I speak America I speak English, I speak English, the English language in America. Now, the thing about English is it has a variety of dialects. There's actually Nigerian English, there's Caribbean English, of course, there's American English, and of course, British English. Um, so I've touched so many things that I wanted to many aspects of the evolution of the English language. I've touched many aspects that I wanted to touch on. Um, and so, I talked about the influence of the Old Norse language. How it created it. It led to the development of words you know that are very familiar to us in the English language, like law. That's from the Old Norse. Law, from original Old Norse, was log, and that means fixed or to be laid down. Law. There's bag. Uh, they, the word they is from the Old Norse. Egg, leg, um, freckle. These are from the Old Norse, and they came to us. They came into the English language from the Old Norse. Um, and I've talked about how the Anglo-Saxon, you know, the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons, they mingled their Germanic languages and created the Anglo-Saxon Old English language, and how it evolved, and how there was the development of a parallel system of the languages with the Norman conquest, the Normans, Norman French or Old French, who were the elite. They were members of the aristocratic class, the nobility. They spoke a Norman French, while the ordinary people, the farmers, they spoke Anglo-Saxon, Old English, and eventually, after a while, things merged. And in 1362, when the English was introduced in Parliament. Parliament, of course, that word comes from Old French. Uh, you know, uh, Jury, clergy, sermon. Those are words that came about from Old French, and eventually we had England had an English speaker for a king. That was Henry IV, and the English language started to evolve and develop rapidly. And of course, there was the great vowel shift that occurred during the early modern English, that created the early modern English from between 1500 to 1700. The 1400 to 1700, the great vowel shift occurred, where words like there were knife, knife, which was a Viking word. The pronunciation shifted from the Middle English. Middle English, it was pronounced neef, like Kneef, Kneef, and the great vowel shift dropped some consonants like the K, and you're pronouncing knife, but the spelling remained the same. It had still had the K now, and the double E, the pronunciation E changed to I, so knife. And the same thing with bite. It was beat, Beet, beat. It changed to bite, right? Bite. So English is, I love the and appreciate the English language, and so I hope people enjoy the discussion on the evolution of the English language. Like I've enjoyed studying its evolution, and I continue to study the English language. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I'm going to stop here. But I'm also going to just mention that I also draw attention to color of law violations, which I've been suffering in Montgomery County, Maryland. I've basically been held captive in Montgomery County due to a swatting that I suffered almost 3 years ago. I've not had a trial. I talked about justice. This has been injustice. It's been a violation of the rule of law. A corrupt, racist, and xenophobic judge, Judge James Bonifant, he's dragged on a uh, a case in which I was framed. Charges should never have been filed due to prosecutorial misconduct. I was swatted in my home. I wasn't committing any crime. I was in my home. I'm a law abiding American citizen. And on May 16, 2023, for no reason, I wasn't committing any crime, but I was raided in my home. I was, placed under false imprisonment. I was assaulted by Montgomery County Police. I was dehumanized. I was shot in the head. There's stitches. I was stitched later on at the hospital, based on on a hoax call, false call, a malicious call. An emergency evaluation petition was filed by a man. I don't know if he has dementia, but he was impersonating himself as my uncle. But he told lies. Right, everything he wrote in the emergency petition was a fabrication. I wasn't aware of this. It was an ex parte decision, and it was intended to obstruct justice and block an equal employment opportunity filing I done with the Department of Navy and Department of Defense, where I was working as of that time. And GDA Ware, he was my emergency contact, and he was used by rogue agents of the Navy and the police, and in order to obstruct justice. I had filed a complaint, which is my legitimate right to petition the government. So due to the swatting and violation of my rights, false charges were subsequently filed against me. It turns out the police who assaulted me and shot me and raided me in my home, they lied and said I assaulted them. There's no evidence of this. No video shows that that I assaulted them. I never assaulted them, but I've been denied a day in court. The charges should never have been filed, but the case has been dragged on. It's intended to discredit me and prevent me from working. The judge, James Bonifant, prevented me from working. He said he wanted me to lose my job at the Pentagon. This was in October 2023. He said it. But that is a violation of the law, right? It violates my 14th Amendment rights. And he's violated my rights in so many ways. He committed me wrongfully. He's done a number of unscrupulous things. He keeps using fraudulent incompetency to stand trial orders. He's used to doing this, and I'm somebody who had no criminal history, no criminal record. I'm a law abiding person. I was actually working in the federal government, the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, holding a top secret clearance, TSSCI, and so there was no reason why I should have been swatted. There was no reason why if there was anything amiss or awry, the police should have called me or informed my family. I have family, and my aunt's a psychiatrist who practices in the state of Maryland. My mom's alive. She's 84 years old. She was shocked. I have siblings, 6 siblings. Nobody knew. My family did not know where I was. I was kidnapped by the state of Maryland under color of law, right? Under color of law, I was kidnapped, and I've still been held captive. My life has been put on hold for the almost 3 years because the state of Maryland and in order to which has been co-opted by rogue agents of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, and the slumlord I was renting from. They've been co-opted to try and coerce me to obstruct justice. And of course, this is a violation of the rule. It impugns the rule of law. It violates my constitutional rights, and it's a miscarriage of justice that I'm going through. So I hope that the public will help, address this injustice I've been suffering. I've written the Attorney General. The Attorney General asked me to report Judge James Bonifan to the Commission on Judicial Disabilities. I'm astonished that the media has not picked this up. It's just astonishing. It lets you know how corporate media, mainstream media, is. They are bought. They're not neutral. They're not doing their work. They're in the pockets of the big, the money bags, and it's unfortunate. In any event, I'll keep you posted. Thank you.